Actually, the stupidest question I've been asked was by one of my students who asked me if I had to wear it in the shower.
I remember being asked whether my children have seen me without hijab or my husband's seen me without hijab. And so I think there's just a notion that, you know, it's somehow cemented on our heads and we never remove it.
Or when I speak English, they just look at me and they're shocked. You know, the jaw drops and they're like, wow, you speak English.
One instance I was asked if I was sure I was not wearing a turban because there was a confusion around another faith community.
In the 18th century, Europe began its gradual invasion of the heartlands of Islam. By the early 20th century, Muslim countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East were under total European domination. During this time, new myths about Muslim women were manufactured, often to justify colonialism. Many of these myths have survived to this day.
The European was to go in and civilize. The mission of empire was a mission of civilization.
Catherine Bullock is currently writing her PhD thesis on the dress code of Muslim women.
And so you see a lot of authors discussing how we have to go in there and help save the Muslim woman from her Mohammedan religion. So the veil then becomes the symbol of oppression.
So what happens, in fact, is that the veil becomes a metaphor which actually stands in for the reality of Muslim women who are wearing it. And therefore our identities are erased by that sort of discourse and construction of our identity, which is negatively construed.
One of the first things they did in Egypt, for example, was close the medical schools, the women's medical schools. Before the British came, there were women, Egyptian women, who were studying to be doctors. Well, the British thought this was terrible because how could women with their delicate constitutions handle something like medicine, which was so difficult and also involved seeing the body, which was something that women shouldn't do.
If you had a picture of a woman in a face veil, that was the Middle East. And it conjured up all the images. It was degrading, it was exotic, it was fascinating, it was disgusting, it was all those things wrapped.
And I think that it has served to create a stereotype of a Muslim woman as being backward, voiceless, product of a misogynistic society.
With recent upheavals in the Muslim world, new layers of distortion have been added to the image of Muslim women.
They look at different societies and countries where culturally they are oppressive to women, and they put that culture onto Islam and state that because this country is predominantly Muslims, this is why these people treat their women in the manner that they do.
The stereotypes about women who are non-Western in general are negative. They are not as liberated, they are not as advanced as women in Western industrialized nations. Muslim women fall into the same category. The only, I think, difference is that in the case of Muslim women, it is assumed that Islam is the justification for their oppression.
But now you have the notion of the veil as a representative of a terrorist. That's who Muslims are now for people in the West. There's one book that's called Islam in the World, and they have a woman in a scarf like this and she's holding a gun. And that's the symbol of what Islam does to the world. She's the symbol of Islam, here's the gun, terrorism.
As with stereotypes of the past, today's images almost always focus on the outer appearance of Muslim women. Little is ever said about their values or beliefs. An accurate view of Islam's concept of humanity can be found in two major sources. The first is the Quran, Islam's highest authority, God's final revelation to humankind. Whoever does good and believes, whether male or female, such will enter paradise, and they shall not be wronged in the slightest. Surely the noblest of you in the sight of God is the best in conduct. Indeed, God is all-knowing, all-aware.
Our true beauty lies within, and through our actions, our deeds, our behavior is how we will be judged. And so we need to focus more on developing our inner self rather than being too preoccupied with exterior appearances.
After the Quran, the next most important source in Islam are the authentic traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. God does not look upon your appearances and wealth, rather, He looks upon your hearts and deeds. By stressing the profound worth of the inner person, Islam reduces the importance of physical and material factors that often act as a barrier between people and an obstacle to true belief.
You begin to focus more on who you are inside as opposed to what you look like on the outside. That doesn't mean that you don't give beauty its place. Everyone, I think beauty has its place, but I don't believe it's the main goal for any human being, male or female.
During the course of her research, Catherine Bullock has interviewed numerous women who observe the Islamic dress code.
In common, I think their experiences were, first of all, that they all believed that it was a requirement of Islam. They all believed that the verses in the Quran were very clear. The other thing that I noticed in common was a very high sense of self-esteem and self-confidence among those women. Islam has a way of giving people a sense of psychological certainty, and they were very comfortable in their hijab and they were very proud to wear it.
About 1983, when I'd come back from the pilgrimage to Mecca, where I had had an incredible experience and a joyous and wonderful affirming of who I was in terms of my Islamic identity as a woman, I decided at that point in time that I wanted to be very much part of that entire community and also be dressed in a way which, 1983 in North America, was very different from what was happening around me.
What motivated me was when I had gone back to study the Quran, I had found that it was a direct command from Allah, from God, and that's why I wear hijab.
The reality is that for most North American Muslim women who wear hijab, hijab is very much a choice, because a woman who wears hijab is going against the mainstream.
In most societies, the idea of appropriate dress is it's understood by people. It's a common idea, and no one's enforcing anything. People enforce it on themselves because they agree with that notion. They agree that this is the proper dress for this situation.
Actually, all the Muslim women I know thought long and hard before they decided to wear hijab and before they decided to become practicing Muslims, because Islam, I might add, is not just about a scarf on a woman's head. Islam is a way of life, and a Muslim woman who chooses Islam is trying her best to practice Islam in all facets of life.
For many Muslim women, dressing modestly is an act of worship, which stems from a clear understanding that the Quran is the unchanged and unaltered word of God. For them, choosing to dress differently is not an issue of patriarchy, because, in Islam, God is neither male nor female.
In Islam, the concept of God is gender neutral. Allah created genders but is not gendered. And I think that's important. Therefore, there's not an issue of favoring one or the other gender.
Say to the believing men that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty. That is purer for them, and God is well aware of what they do. The duty to behave and dress modestly has been ordained for both genders by the Quran.
A man, for example, who sees fit to wear very revealing clothing, to flirt with women, to ogle at women, is doing something wrong, just as a woman who does the same is doing something wrong.
It means that they have to become responsible and make sure that wherever women are in the home or in the workplace, and whoever the women are, Muslim or non-Muslim, are respected, that they're treated with kindness, that they are protected from innuendos, from slurs, from demeaning jibes.
I lived in a society where both men and women in northern Pakistan, where they both dressed modestly. And when I did, I realized all the other things that came along with it, how it really affected social interaction and behavior. And one thing that I became very aware of was how much flirting, innuendo, inappropriate jokes were actually happening in back home in Western society. All of those things disappeared.